Mirrors are one of the most enduring supernatural fascinations for humankind. From a mythological tale of the ancient Greek Narcissus, the namesake of narcissism, a form of malignant self-obsession, wasting away while staring at his own reflection in a pool of water, to the multiplicity of schoolyard tales about Bloody Mary, a vengeful specter who will deal some terrible fate to whoever summons her by invoking her name in front of a mirror. The subtle art of catoptromancy is divination through mirrors, a practice enshrined in a huge number of folk religions the world over, and its extensions like the obsidian mirror owned by Elizabethan royal court alchemist John Dee, that supposedly allowed him to speak to Enochian beings from the angelic realms to seek forbidden knowledge. And even in our supposedly enlightened modern age, if you ever find yourself in the unfortunate position of accidentally destroying a mirror, it's not unlikely that someone around you will gently intone, "That's 7 years of bad luck." SCP-1620 is an interesting variation of the strange supernatural aura that seems to pervade our reflections. At face value, it's a large, rectangular chunk of sheet metal, measuring approximately 2 meters by 2.5 meters by 0.25 meters, curving at an angle of 2.5 degrees along the long edge. One of the shorter edges is jagged, perhaps indicating that it was once torn roughly from some large construction, but all of the other edges are smooth and factory finished. It's an interesting alloy, containing large amounts of both titanium and tungsten, metals known for being both extremely heavy and extremely durable. The other side is blackened and charred, with a distinctive pattern of pits across the metal that makes it seem as though it survived re-entry through the Earth's atmosphere. The inner side, however, shows none of this damage and seems to be a perfectly reflected mirror. And if you happen to catch yourself reflected within this mirror, then you're about to experience an incredibly bizarre and distressing few months. You see, whenever a human, or even humanoid, entity sets foot in front of the reflective side of the metal, they become immediately infected by a parasitic metaphysical entity known as SCP-1620-1, which copies and replaces humanoid reflections for unknown reasons. Perhaps it is part of some natural incorporeal life cycle for this still mysterious species. The creature is only ever visible when the infected individual is looking into a reflective surface. The types of behavior and interactions you can expect from the creature will alter over a 1 to 10 week period, separated by Foundation researchers into 3 distinct epochal stages. Infection Stage 1 is the shortest of the 3 stages. It lasts between 6 and 18 hours after initial exposure to SCP-1620, or in SCP-1620-1 in Stage 3 maturity out in the wild, the period where they become actively infectious to others, but we'll get to all those nightmares later. During the first stage, the entity will be visually identical to your reflection while you're infected, and at first, you won't notice anything wrong. However, over the course of this first stage, the reflection will begin to gradually desynchronize from your own, at first manifesting as a kind of delay or lag that will perhaps make you doubt your perceptions if you happen to notice it. At a point, if you're observant, you'll clock that it's actually an entirely separate, conscious entity that is attempting to mimic your movements and expressions, and in some cases is falling woefully short. This will be the beginning of the entity's progression to full independence from you and your movements. Infection Stage 2 will commence at around the 24-hour mark, and will last for around 7 subsequent days, though all of this can be somewhat flexible from victim to victim. Stage 2 is marked by increasing independence from the host, meaning that, especially when the two of you are alone, the entity will make much less of an effort to appear as though it really is just your reflection. Yes, we find this incredibly spooky too, so you're not alone if you're feeling a creeping sensation making its way up your spine right now. If bystanders are there, the entity will try to imitate your movements still, but with that lag that sets in during the later phases of Stage 1. When alone, however, if you look at your reflection, the entity will seem to want to build a rapport with you. It will make no attempt to hide its sentience, and will communicate with you using friendly gestures and facial expressions. You'll have no reason to fear at this point, after all, given that it can't interact with anything out of the mirror. It will do everything it can to present a non-threatening attitude. When you're looking, anyway. A concerning tidbit of Stage 2 is that when viewed from a distance by bystanders that the entity is not aware or looking, it can be observed staring hatefully at the infected person while they're not looking at their reflection. I don't think it's too much of a leap in interpretation to say this indicates some level of underlying malice. They'll sometimes even make threatening gestures, like drawing a thumb across their throat, in a manner that seems to indicate violent plans for the infectee. As this stage progresses, it won't just be the movements of the entity that change, but the physical features, making it more and more differentiated from the person it once mimicked. Facial features, weight, and body type can all change, making it seem as though your very reflection is mutating into something you can no longer control, something that doesn't even seem like you anymore. When the new look of the SCP-1620-1 entity has fully stabilized into something new and frightening, it is time for the third stage of infection to begin. Infection Stage 3's duration is indeterminate, though no cases studied by the Foundation so far have gone on longer than 9 weeks. You have my sincere sympathies if you prove to be a record breaker on that front. This is the mature stage of the SCP-1620-1 entity's life cycle, wherein the entity will only vaguely resemble the person who was originally infected, and, fascinatingly, appears to be more of a reflection of the subject's subconscious self-reflection than of their actual physical appearance. In layman's terms, think of it as a mean-spirited boardwalk caricature of your soul that seems to highlight and exaggerate the things about you that you're most insecure about. Worried that you're balding, the entity will have the shiniest chrome dome you can possibly conceive. Insecure about your body weight in either direction, expect an elephantine individual or a billowing scarecrow every time you look in the mirror. Think your nose is too big? The entity in the reflection will present you with a truly legendary schnoz. At this point, I believe you get the idea. Suffice to say, whether intended to be cruel on the entity's part or not, subjects have reported this stage as being absolutely ruinous to their self-esteem. In that sense, it's almost like staring too long at the comment section of one of our YouTube videos. Sorry, little on-the-job humor there. As I mentioned briefly during my description of Stage 1, at this stage the entity becomes actively infectious, even if the person exposed has never seen the reflection in the original SCP-1620 piece of metal. If you're unlucky enough to see your own reflection in whatever surface the Stage 3 entity is also occupying, you're about to undergo everything we just described happening here, which I've heard from subjects is not a particularly fun time. At this stage, any pretense of kindness will have been fully dropped by the entity. Anytime you're looking at your reflection, it will be making an active attempt to threaten or distress you in a manner that might make you want to seek help or share your experience with somebody else. This is part of the creature's self-propagation instinct. If you do get someone to help you, there's a considerable chance that they will become infected in the process while you try to prove to them what you're experiencing is real. Eventually, though, Stage 3 of the infection will end, wherein the entity appears to die and your reflection returns to normal. There have been no recorded instances of the phenomenon recurring after Stage 3 yet, but around 60% of people who have been unlucky enough to go through this process will leave it with feelings of unpleasant body dysmorphia and an acute case of cataptrophobia, the fear of mirrors. Naturally, the SCP Foundation has been eager to understand more about both the original SCP-1620 object and of the effects it has on people unlucky enough to experience it, and thus has conducted a series of exceedingly chaotic tests that I would be doing you a serious disservice to not describe. It says a lot about how a series of test logs are going to go when they start with a D-Class getting given incendiary weapons. That's right, in Test 1, 4 different D-Classes were given different incendiary items: a lighter, a blowtorch, an arc welder, and a flamethrower. All were given the instructions to attempt to damage the reflective surface of the mirror, but all of their attempts were completely ineffective. This turned into an entirely different type of test when the 4th D-Class refused to let go of the flamethrower and attempted to attack the people conducting the test. As a result, a Foundation guard needed to blow the rogue D-Class up with an RPG. They found out that the metal's reflective surface was also not affected by the blast damage of the exploding D-Class. Science marches on. Because they seemingly learned nothing from the shortfalls of the previous tests, SCP-1640 was placed into an opaque containment unit and taken to a large outdoor area, where another series of D-Classes were given a wide variety of construction tools, including saws, drills, claw and sledgehammers, and handheld jackhammers. The D-Classes, who undeniably had some pent-up anger after their years of being imprisoned and used as guinea pigs, were instructed to go full rage room on the reflective surface of the metal. They attacked the anomaly at full force and found that they were incapable of causing any meaningful damage, though the pneumatic jackhammer was able to knock some reflective segments from the object that were then taken away for further testing. The objective of the experiment then went from whether the source anomaly could be damaged to whether any intellectual insight could be gained into the motivations of the SCP-1620-1 entities themselves. A D-Class was exposed to the reflective surface and allowed to progress to the second stage of infection. The D-Class was then given the instruction to attempt direct communication with the anomalous reflection while it was still in its attempts at appearing friendly and non-threatening. The D-Class was given a list of approved questions to ask, but the reflection seemed to have no interest in actually returning the responses. Instead, it continued the standard program of performing hollow acts of non-threatening friendship, nodding pleasantly, giving small waves of welcome, and occasionally miming hugs in the air. Like a friendly silent clown, such as the one from the Terrifier movie franchise. However, as you may have intuited from my earlier explanations, the entity's tune very much changed when the D-Class turned around. The reflection started pulling enraged, contemptuous faces with clenched teeth, miming strangling the air. It's moments like this that make you extremely grateful that the thin surface of the mirror's edge will eternally separate us from the whims of the creatures there. Speaking of creatures, the Foundation wanted to know the limits to what kinds of creatures that SCP-1620 is able to affect beyond just humans. One of the tests involved requisitioning an orangutan and exposing it to the reflective surface of SCP-1620. The creature was placed into isolation and viewed with a remote camera as the state progressed. Interestingly, the Foundation discovered that the anomalous effect does affect orangutans just as it affects humans, with the orangutan appearing extremely distressed when its reflection acted in a manner consistent with standard Stage 2 infection. The reflection itself acted threateningly in a less human fashion, and a fashion more befitting of typical orangutan threat displays. This suggests a possible telepathic component to the anomaly, which could require some further research. The success with the orangutan prompted the Foundation to test on a number of other animals, including but not limited to an iguana, a bull mastiff, a tuna, and an African gray parrot. Much like the orangutan, they were observed with a remote camera, but they found that no anomalous effects were observed during the first 72 hours, at which point the tests were suspended. Clearly, only humanoid creatures such as humans and primates were affected by the SCP-1620 phenomenon. With that firmly established, the Foundation continued to attempt to goad interesting reactions out of the reflection entities. One D-Class was knowingly infected with SCP-1620-1, and midway through infection Stage 1, he was instructed to take a hammer to the mirror that contained the anomalous reflection. The D-Class did this, and the mirror was immediately shattered without incident. The next time the D-Class stood in front of a reflective surface, the entity appeared again without any sign of damage. Interestingly, when the entity reached Stage 2, its aggressive behavior seemed substantially more infuriated and forceful than a standard instance. It seems to prove that these frightening creatures do indeed hold grudges, hinting at a degree of malicious intelligence beneath it all. But what if you get multiple mirrors involved? That was another question that the Foundation was eager to answer. They infected a D-Class with SCP-1620-1, and when the infection progressed to Stage 2, they placed the D-Class into a room with multiple mirrors. While the instance behaved in a manner consistent to standard Stage 2 infection, all of the reflections behaved in complete unison rather than behaving as separate entities with their own consciousnesses. It's a small mercy that at least they can't proliferate that easily. There is a twist to all this, though. You see, up to this point, it was believed that while being infected with SCP-1620-1 can be extremely distressing, it was considered one of the few positive aspects of this particular anomaly that there was no way of it killing you. One more test from the Foundation proved that this was not entirely the case. 2 D-Classes with Stage 3 infections were directed into a closed room which had a full-wall mirror, wondering what would happen if 2 late-stage infected reflections were placed in the same surface. It turned out they behaved in an extremely territorial manner, with incredible hostility to one another. The 2 reflections chased each other around the mirror, while the 2 D-Classes stared on in confusion and horror. One of the infected reflections pushed the other to the ground and brutally beat him into submission before strangling him to death. Immediately, the person whose reflection was killed collapsed to the ground and began convulsing. He died of an apparent brain hemorrhage shortly afterwards. The D-Class whose reflection committed the reflection crime fell to the floor in an extreme state of emotional stress, repeating, "That wasn't him. He wasn't really like that." No other tests of this nature have been repeated. As is the case with many anomalies that have an infectious mimetic effect, SCP-1620 has been designated Euclid Class, and has accordingly tight containment protocols. It is contained within a sealed room with both the walls and ceilings painted a matte, non-reflective gray color to reduce the possibility of accidental exposure in the course of experimentation. To that same end, the reflective inner surface of the object is to be pointed away from the door of the chamber at all times. For obvious reasons, there is a flat denial of any reflective objects being brought into this room, and anyone seen not observing these rules is likely to be met with a severe reprimand from the site director. And yes, that does include lenses of cameras. In order to study or take a sample of SCP-1620, you need to first obtain Level 4 authorization, and seeing as that's one level below the O5 Council itself, obtaining it is no easy feat. If you are granted this permission, you'll still be subject to some serious restrictions. You won't be permitted to wear any reflective clothing, and you must voluntarily submit to a 24-hour period of isolation afterwards, where your colleagues can be sure that you're not at risk of spreading the infection further. And if you do show signs of infection, you'll be submitted to an entirely different set of special containment procedures. You will be placed in a completely opaque container with an air supply and transported to an isolation cell, which will contain a single movable mirror and no other reflective surfaces, in order to maintain an incredibly tight standard of control over the environment. Whenever someone else enters the room, the mirror must be placed flat against the wall or ground to minimize the risk of further infection. The purpose of having the mirror in there in the first place is to track the progression of the infection, and once the infection is confirmed to have reached Stage 3, you will be kept in isolation for a further 3 months in order to make sure that you're not still infected. We can only hope you've got a long list of books that you want to get through if this ends up happening to you, because given the reflective nature of screens, you won't be allowed to browse the internet during this time. Once the Foundation can be confident that your condition has fully run its course, you'll be allowed back out to pursue your normal duties. Because of these strict procedures, SCP-1620, while not strictly speaking dangerous compared to many of the anomalies under the Foundation's watch, is still considered an extremely undesirable case to get assigned to as a member of personnel. Who really wants to spend 3 months of mind-numbing boredom, accented by occasionally seeing your reflection freaking it in the mirror? So, if you happen to catch your reflection doing something strange in the corner of your eye, only to see it change quickly back to normal when you turn to look at it head-on, my advice would be relatively simple. Don't worry about it. It'll pass eventually, so long as you stay away from other people who are infected, and other than that, you just need to make sure you don't utterly lose your mind in the meantime. Good luck. Check out the DrBob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of DrBob, like Scariest SCPs That Won't Stop Until You're Dead.